Welcome to Design Downtime, the podcast where we celebrate the joys of living a balanced creative life. I'm your host, Guy Siegel, a design director in Toronto, Canada, and I invite you to join me on this journey as we redefine what it means to be a successful design professional. Let's break free from the shackles of hustle culture and embrace the full spectrum of human experience, because life is too precious to be spent only in pursuit of productivity. Today, I have the pleasure of talking to Sara Wachter-Boettcher. Sara is a leadership coach, speaker, author, and the CEO of Active Voice, a company dedicated to creating bold leaders and better workplaces in design and tech. She started Active Voice after spending a decade running a content and UX consultancy. Her books include Technically Wrong, Design for Real Life with Eric Meyer, and Content Everywhere. Learn more about her work at activevoicehq.com. Sara, welcome to the show.
Hi, Guy. Thank you for having me.
And today you want to talk to us about powerlifting.
Sure. Yeah, let's talk about some powerlifting.
Better than talking about crypto, right?
I mean, there's a lot of things better than talking about crypto, but I also like lifting weights quite a bit.
I know nothing about lifting or powerlifting other than the basic of it's a heavy thing and you lift it.
That's an important piece of it.
Great, we're done.
All right. Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about it. So, and I'll talk a little bit about just sort of my relationship with lifting. There's a lot of different styles out there. There's a lot of different beliefs. If you have started to look at any fitness content on the internet, you will know that it is a wild, 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 wild world out there, most of which I don't engage with. So I want to talk a little bit about, I guess, my experience with lifting, which, goes all the way back. I learned to lift weights from my brother when I was probably 13 or so. And I wouldn't say I learned well, but I did learn, and I started getting interested in sort of strength training. I've always been pretty strong, sturdy person, and it was always kind of fun. And over the years, it was always something I kind of did. I mixed it in with other kinds of workouts. But in the past few years, I've gotten a lot more interested in lifting heavy weights and really trying out more barbell lifts. So powerlifting is a style of lifting that's often very barbell focused. Barbell meaning the big bar, the big long one that you put all the weights on. And so that means things like bench press, barbell squats, deadlifting, and a whole lot of associated stuff that goes with it.
So what drew you into lifting?
Like I said, I think when I was growing up, I always just liked being strong. That's something that women are often not really taught to do or to be. And there's a lot of messaging about being small and messaging about that's very focused on body size and on weight. And one of the things that's nice about lifting is it kind of gives you a way to think about your physical body that's not about whether it's small or the size that it is or how it looks in clothes. And it is much more about what can my body do. And I think that was part of the reason. I think particularly because for me growing up, I was somebody who participated in a lot of sports when I was younger, but I wasn't always great at them. I'm really tall. And so I played volleyball for a while, but I'm not the most coordinated. And so hitting, right? You got to time your body jumping into the air at the same time that the ball is coming from somebody who's setting it up for you so you can hit it over the net. It's a lot of coordination. And I was okay, but I never really saw myself as athletic. And so when you fast forward to the most recent era of my life, I think one of the things that lifting has really done for me is sort of given me permission to claim athlete as a way of thinking about myself in a way that I didn't feel like I was allowed to have when I was growing up, because I wasn't that good at sports and because I didn't have the right kind of body or I didn't have the right kind of build. And so I would have never labeled myself that. And so I feel like that's one of the things that's really drawn me to lifting, is that it's shifted my relationship to my body and given me permission to feel good and excited about what it can do.
Were you always searching for a sport that you would feel at home?
I wouldn't put it that way. I think that I've always been interested in doing stuff physically, right? I've always been out there running, not super well, but I'll get out and do it. Sign me up for one long run a year and make myself train for it, half marathon, not the full. The full is a lifestyle commitment that I can't do, but the half, I can train up for that and I'll do it. And I'm not fast, but I'll get it done. And I've always liked hiking and, I'm always doing stuff. And I think I just always thought of it as like either exercise, workouts, things to do to be healthy, or maybe recreation if I was doing something like hiking or maybe like taking a nice long outdoor bike ride. And maybe it was both of those things. But how I thought about myself within those sports, I think is really what has shifted. Being able to look at it not just as this is a workout I'm doing for my health or for some kind of like sense of like something I should do, and more like, this is something I participate in because there's a joy in participating in it because I like the way it makes me feel. Well, I think the thing about lifting is that it's very satisfying, that kind of like sense of, oh, I can do that. And it's not just satisfying when you're like in the gym lifting. One of the things that's really satisfying about it is like, you want me to help you move a couch? Oh, yeah, sure. No problem. Like, I don't think about it. I'm carrying in heavy stuff from the car to the house. No problem. I'll have the 2 40-pound containers of cat litter, one in each arm. It's fine. It's no big deal. And it sounds like small, but there's something really nice about feeling capable out in the world, feeling like I can be helpful to other people when they need it. Not everybody is going to be able to lift the way that I can do it. So, like, sometimes I'm the one who's helping the like small older woman with her suitcase on the plane, right? Getting it up in that overhead bin. And I don't think everybody has to do this, but I think that there's something that feels really good to me about it, that feels like I can really rely on myself and I can rely on this body to do things for me.
Is that a feeling that was missing for you before powerlifting?
Yeah, I think it's complicated. I think one of the things that I don't know that I would have said it was missing, because I don't know that that's something I would have even thought about or considered as a way to feel. One of the things that I think is a pretty common experience for girls is to grow up with so much emphasis on, again, like how small you are, how thin you are, your body size, and then, like various other ways of thinking about women's bodies, right? Like women's bodies get sexualized pretty young. And so the only relationship I was used to having with my body was one of judgment, either my own judgment or others' judgment, or like my fear of other judgment leading to my own judgment. And so that was the way I understood my body, if I understood it at all, was just through that lens of like, what does it look like? Is it okay? As in like, is it acceptable to society? What's wrong with it? What are all the things I should feel bad about it? And that was it. I think that beyond that, I oftentimes actually didn't have much of a relationship with my body. I think for me, and I think this is true for a lot of people, and maybe particularly women, I think I felt a lot of dissociation from my body, in the sense of like having to really be present with it and think about not just the things that are wrong with it, because that was easy, but more like, what does it need? And how am I taking care of it? Not how am I, forcing it to do things so that I can be a certain size, or how am I like trying to contort my body, but more, what does my body actually need to feel good? What does my body need to be safe? What does my body need to be able to do something challenging? And like, it's just a very different set of questions. And I will say this, that I think that there's a lot of ways to get into a sort of more embodied way of being in the world. Meaning like we live in our heads a lot. Most of us who do knowledge work particularly, you've been praised for living in your head because it's where the smarts are. But getting into your body can be a little bit harder. And there are people who get into that sort of embodied state through meditation and yoga, many other ways that one might sort of become more connected to their body and what it's like, what is it actually telling me right now? But some of those didn't feel as easy for me, I think, because in some of those cultures, there's still such a like emphasis on, like when you start hanging out with the like yoga crowd, there is a lot of emphasis on the same things of like being a very particular kind of thin white woman. And so I never felt like at home in a lot of those spaces. And I think that for me, that like lifting and particularly getting into lifting heavier weights was a way to regain that connection to my body that had been difficult for me.
getting that connection with your body, is that something that, again, you had to work towards? Because as you said, people who, work with their brains, there's less of an emphasis of you also need to develop your body at the same time.
Yeah, I think that it's a bunch of different things. So I do think part of it is the professional work that a lot of us do puts us in a space where we're living in our head a lot. That is what is prioritized. That's what you get paid for. And so that is part of it. I also think there's a whole bunch of like cultural and social things, and then also personal things that can lead to a lot of physical, I'd say dissociation, which might sound extreme, but also just sort of like physical distance from your body, sort of like a discomfort with sort of being in your body and listening to your body. Like I said, I think the cultural conditioning that girls tend to get is part of it. And for me, I also had lots of like early childhood experiences that were traumatic that I think also really taught me to shut off parts of my body, or to sort of like not think about myself in that way. One of the ways that I coped was to be in my head, right? Like I can rationalize things. I can always think my way through something. I can explain my way through something. But one of the things I realized, and this gets a little bit like intimate or deep, but one of the things I realized is that, like, for example, in therapy, I'm good at talk therapy because I can talk, because that's up in your head. And I can like talk through, like, here's the thing I experienced, and here's how I know it's impacted me, and here's the ways that I've moved through it. And here, I can like talk through that. And I don't find it challenging to talk about, for example, like past trauma. Like, that's fine. No problem. We can do it. But allowing myself to actually like sit with myself and notice what is going on with my body when I'm going through periods of stress or when I'm thinking about past events, that can be very different. And that's something I just simply like lacked the muscle memory to do. Wasn't sort of part of what I was doing. And the way that manifests in life and in work and in everywhere is really like, not being able necessarily to notice when you're starting to feel stressed or you're starting to feel afraid or threatened, not necessarily recognizing the signals that your physical body is sending to your brain and then doing something with them, because that's so disconnected. And so you stay up here and you tell yourself, nope, things are fine, but your body's actually responding. And so like when you feel threatened, let's say, and I mean threatened in the sense of like, it could be anything. It could be like an actual physical threat. Like, I don't know, somebody is like pulls a knife on you, but it can also just be like somebody's a jerk to you in a meeting. And that sense of physical threat, like that shows up in your body, and you get tense. Your heart rate goes up, muscles start to clench up. Like, there's all these things that start to happen. Cortisol's getting released. And when you're living in your head and you don't recognize those signals, you become a little bit more of a runaway train. You are more likely to start reacting to the things happening in your body without recognizing that that's what's going on. And so the value of really being more connected to my body has also been just like more awareness of what's happening with me, and more awareness of when something is kind of pushing me up or down a little bit and I'm starting to get defensive, and noticing that I'm starting to feel defensive before I'm behaving in a defensive way, for example, is really helpful. It's super helpful to be able to notice that those feelings are coming up and then have a choice about what you're going to do about it. And the more physically disconnected we are, the harder that is. And like I said, I think that we become physically disconnected for lots of different reasons, but it's very common, and it's completely possible to reconnect, but it can be some work, and that work looks different for different people. I think it's one of those things too, where it's like, you have to figure out what works for you.
So once you started powerlifting, what were the changes that you noticed happening?
Well, it's a little bit hard to say exactly, because I had always lifted weights, and I just sort of like got more intense and got a little bit more kooky about it. But I think for me, one of the things that was really valuable about getting more into it was that I really worked on my form, and I got a lot more feedback, and I got a lot of feedback on sort of like what seemed like very small differences in how my lats are engaged, or like what's happening in my core. And getting that kind of feedback, which you start to really need when you start lifting heavier weights, because like that's how people hurt themselves, is the small stuff, right? Like you get a little bit of an arch in your back when you're deadlifting, and you're deadlifting on a lighter weight. Probably won't do, it's not ideal, but like it's not the strongest way to lift, but you'll be okay. At a heavy weight, you just screwed up your low back. So all of those little form checks became really valuable. And so getting more of that feedback, what I think it really helped me do was just improve my like proprioception, fancy word for just sort of like knowing what your body is doing and knowing where your body is in space, which was really hard for me, like being able to notice or to like make tiny adjustments that were almost imperceptible requires a certain level of awareness and then control over like these little parts of your body. Like, for example, I think about a friend of mine who said once like that for her, that kind of thing is very like easy. Like she said she was in a yoga class and the teacher was like, relax your skin. And everybody in the class was like, what are you even talking about? And she was like, oh, yes, obviously, relax your skin. And it just like there's this like mental connection that's like you can just feel it relax. And like whether that's literally true or not, I think that we're very different in some of those ways. Like if somebody tells me, for example, just today, I was trying to do something where you really need to have your low back on the floor and like firmly on the floor. And I'm like, I can feel it. It's on the floor. And no, not enough. And it was that tiny little, okay, now, and then I could feel how much stronger the brace in my deep core was because it was so firmly planted. And it's that kind of little adjustment that it just, I don't know, it kind of like, I think it did really shift that physical awareness. So like I said, the earlier weightlifting, I was lifting weights, but I think what changed was like, because it got a lot more like that really specific understanding of like body mechanics and like, what is my body actually doing right now and needing to pay attention to it. I think that's part of what helped me be better about noticing things that are going on in my body more at the emotional level too.
Is that a sport where the training for I would say the main event in quotes, is actually the bulk of the sport?
I mean, yeah, so I don't compete. I could, I guess, get into competing. People who compete, they tend to compete in very particular lifts, like big ones, or like I said, like the deadlift, right? And then they'll do a lot of other kinds of things. They'll do a lot of deadlifting to get better at deadlifting, but they'll also do other kinds of like accessory movements, so other things to increase range of motion, stability, doing one leg work instead of both legs, so they'll do all these other things. But yeah, a lot of it's kind of like running in that way. Like you might do speed work and you do drills, you do this, you maybe do some like accessory strength training, but to get better at running, you run.
Does the fact that when you lift, there is sort of an objective, you did it or you didn't do it, does that come into play? That it's not only whether you feel you did a good job, but there's also a measurable external element that says, Sarah, you're hitting your goals.
So yes and no. I think on the one hand, yes, when you're lifting, you have quantitative data and it's like a month ago, I can lift X and now I can lift Y and that's, 10 pounds more, whatever it is. That's great. And I do love to show those gains. I mean, it feels really good to hit a number that you never hit before. But the other part of lifting, and particularly when you're getting into anything where you're doing heavier weights, is you get into like progressive overload, which is basically like in order to get stronger, you have to do things that are at the edge. And that means that sometimes you fail. And in fact, you fail all the time. It's very common, like for me to, for example, bump up my weights and then be like, okay, I'm trying to do a 5x5, which is 5 sets of 5 reps, right? And to get to that last set and be like, oof, I only have 3 left. I can't get the 4th or the 5th one. And you fail. And I mean, particularly for some of the lifts, it can be hard to see yourself fail. For me, I don't like to fail at the ones that are potentially embarrassing because it's obvious. Like when you pick something up off the ground, that one's not so bad because anything you pick up off the ground, if you're failing at it, you just can't pick it up or you can't pick it all the way up. But the lifts where you can drop weights on your body or drop weights from a high point down to the ground, those are definitely for me a more embarrassing way to fail. And you have to be careful too, right? Like if you drop hundreds of pounds onto yourself, that is not great. But for me, I think that getting used to the idea that like sometimes I'm going to make an attempt and I'm not going to do it. Like I have like a very strong bench press. I have more moderately strong some of my other things. And so I was bench pressing and I was feeling super excited. I got this big PR in December for it. Personal record, right? And it's like the women's record at the very small strength gym I go to. So it's not that big of a record, but it's the record there. And I had been feeling so good on bench. That was December. I was feeling so good. And I was like going up from there. And I'd been kind of like really getting ready to do another PR at the end of the next quarter. So whenever that was, March, April. And so I show up for their PR day. They do a little celebration, woohoo, we're all going to do PRs today of whatever thing we've been working on. And I'm like, I'm going to go up by 10 pounds. Like, I think I got this. I did not have it. Failed in front of everyone. I was like, okay, fine. I'm going to try going up by only 5 pounds for my last PR. Failed that too. I was so confident because I was doing multiple reps of my old PR that I was like, I definitely am stronger than I was in December. And I think I was stronger than I was in December, but sometimes you have it and sometimes you don't. Some days are good days and some days are bad days. And sometimes for me, some people really feed off of like having people watching them and cheering them on. And I actually find it a little bit stressful. It's where some of my, that's where some of the like leftover, I don't know, like shame or worry about what people will think. Like that's where some of that comes out. And so I don't know, was that playing a role? It's hard to say. But whatever it was, I had to fail in front of a bunch of people who were all excited to see me win. And yeah, I didn't love it. And at the same time, back in the gym the next week, doing your thing, kind of do these, and you do all these different rounds too. It's not just like one line upward, which is I think one of the things that's nice about it. It wouldn't be nice if you just every single time you were gaining, a little more forever and ever, right? Like your little tech company hockey stick chart. But that's not how it actually works. And one of the things that you do specifically in training is you tend to run in cycles where you kind of are trying to increase for a while. And sometimes you'll increase toward a maximum. So you'll kind of like increase your weight, but decrease the reps as you get up to the top. But then from there, what do? You cycle back around and you start doing something that's easy for you again. That's maybe like a little bit more than where the easy one was last cycle, but you go back to something that feels easy and then you kind of step yourself up slowly. So because of that, it doesn't feel like every time you're there, you have to beat last time. It's actually, that's not a healthy way to do it. It would be actually very stressful on your body to treat it that way. And instead to kind of think of it as these like ongoing cycles of things being, working their way up toward being stronger, but also giving yourself breaks and rest weeks. I'm not super good at that, but that is one of the tenets of doing this kind of training is that you should take a deload week here and there where you don't lift and you give your body a little bit of a break. And all of that I think is nice to kind of think about this balance between challenging yourself and pushing and then also taking your foot off the gas and slowing down and resetting and that feeling of it being good to kind of operate in cycles and not just constant trajectory upward, which I think a lot of us have learned to believe that that's what like life is like and work is like, and it's just not.
So what's your personal training regimen?
Oh boy. Okay. So the first thing I will say about training for lifting is that I eat a lot of protein and I've recently upped that. I've always been, cognizant of eating protein, but now I eat so much protein. And I say that because if you're not eating protein, it's very hard to lift heavy things. And for a lot of women, if you're not eating enough, it's very hard to gain any muscle. And you actually can end up with a lot of challenges where, one of the things that happens within like diet culture where women are kind of trained to eat as little as possible. And you see these like 1,200 calorie diets are very like common in the diet world is that it actually like puts you into this place where you're not eating enough to build any muscle. You don't build any muscle. You don't have any metabolism. So your metabolism tanks. And then over time, it's like you're on a starvation diet, but also your body doesn't really change. So you have this body that's kind of just like holding on to whatever it has. Body size or weight aside, that is a very unhappy place for your body to live. Like your body feels undernourished and weak all the time. And like you can't do anything. So actually eating, important, which I'm good at eating. And then making sure you're getting a lot of protein are really important. So that's kind of like a basic building block before you're even doing anything else. And then my regimen is really mixed, actually. So we're talking about lifting today, but I do a lot of different things because I like to be active, but it's too stressful in the body to lift. Like you can't do it all the time. So I tend to do a couple days a week of heavy days where I'm doing like a couple of the really big lifts on each of those days and then some accessory stuff on those days. And then in between those, I'll do some cross training. So I do like kettlebells and conditioning. So it's a lot of kettlebell swings, but it tends to be a little bit more high reps, more cardio. There's still substantial weight involved, but it's not quite so focused on the big weights, right? So when I go in and lift the big weights, it's like you lift the big heavy thing, I think you sit down for a couple minutes and wait, right? So it's a different style of thing. I also run. I run still a couple days a week. And then I like to get a lap swim day in there too. And then sometimes I do some yoga. But see, now I'm just making a list of stuff for me, like how many days are there in a week? I tend to do something every day. And some days are more intense days and some days are less intense days. But for me, I always try to like spread it out and make sure that I have some recovery for whatever muscle group I was really working. You know, if I do a really hard run, I'm not going to do a lower body lifting day the next day. You want to kind of like have some of that variation. So it depends on my schedule, but that's how I kind of think about it is like, am I getting the mix of things that I want to get in there? And am I getting them in there during in the right flow to not overtax one part of me?
So now that you do all these things, how has it changed the way you see yourself?
Well, I think you've talked a lot about the sort of physical piece of it and the body reconnection. I think the thing I haven't talked about is like maybe the way that it shapes how I see my time and my days. You know, I run a small business. I care about it a lot. I don't think that I should be, you know, hustling and grinding all the time. But I do care about my work. I do believe in it. And it can very easily become the thing that takes up all my time if I let it, right? Like, I mean, that's the nature of work. It will take whatever time you give it. And I don't want to live that way. And so one of the things that getting a little bit more focused on my lifting routine and getting more focused on just sort of like some of the other physical stuff in general, what it really made me do was make time for that first. So it's not like, oh, I meant to get into the gym today, but here are all the things that happened. Which, you know, it's okay if that happens. Like, and I'm not trying to shame anybody who has that. Like, it's totally normal, totally fine, and totally realistic. Also, I don't have kids, so it's a lot harder when people have kids at home sometimes to make this happen. But for me, you know, I think of it as a way to pay myself first. So in personal finance, this is like a concept that they'll talk about, right? So if you want to save money, the way to save money is you pay yourself first, the money that you're going to put in the savings, and then you spend from what's left. If you spend all month and then save what's left over, you are very likely to save substantially less. So I think of this as like paying myself first with time and saying, okay, so if my workouts are a priority, then they get to be kind of like first billing. They don't work around the rest of my schedule. They get first billing, and then work has to work around it. And that does not happen every single day. Like there are days where, I don't know, I'm running a program for a team that's based in India and the time zones are such that it's like, I'm going to do that really early in the morning. And that's fine. There's a good reason for that. The team in India deserves something during their day and not to have 30 people there have to be, you know, doing something at 10 p.m. just for me. Totally happy to do that. And on those specific days when it's important, then yeah, I will flip things around. But at the macro level, it's been really about saying like, this is for me. It's meaningful to me. I care about it. And this is one of the like pillars of my days and weeks that gets to be prioritized. It's not monetizable. I mean, like I'm nowhere near competitive enough for that. And that doesn't mean it's not important. And I think that that's been a really important shift.
That's awesome. Sara, where can people find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. Probably the best social network at this point. And then you can check out what we do at Active Voice at activevoicehq.com.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Guy.
This is all for this episode of Design Downtime. Thank you for joining me. And until next time, I hope you enjoy your downtime.